everybody, welcome to your evolution PowerPoint video notes. We're going to go through some of the basics of evolution and then we will continue on to shaping evolutionary theory. Before we get started, it's important to talk about two very important people to what we currently see as evolutionary theory. So first we have Lamarck and then Darwin, who I'm sure is someone you're all familiar with. So let's back it up a little bit though. Lamarck believed that selection of traits occurred by the use or disuse of organs within the lifetime of the organism. Not really. Darwin, on the other hand, discovered that pre-existing genetic variations, things already in your DNA, determine your existing traits. Still confused? Let's look at an example. Why does the fiddler crab have long claws? So if you're not familiar, fiddler crabs have one long claw and one short claw. Lamarck would explain it like so. You have a crab with short claws. He uses his front claw a lot. Woo, it grew. Guess what? Now all his babies have long claws too. That's like saying if you work out and you have huge biceps, when you have a baby, your baby's born with big biceps, which we all know that isn't true. That's not realistic. Darwin, on the other hand, would explain like so. So you have a population of crabs that have mixed sizes of claws. Due to stress from the environment, the long-clawed are going to survive because they're better suited for survival, fighting mates, etc. Then you get offspring that have large claws because those are the ones that have survived and reproduced with their genes. Not saying the short-clawed crabs couldn't survive and pass on genes, but they're far less likely to. So here's just looking at the different theories. So on the left side we have Lamarck, and on the right side we have Darwin, and then Darwin's theory, of course, is what we believe today. Let's get a little bit more into Darwin. So who was Charles Darwin? Well, he was a British naturalist and he traveled on a ship called the Beagle. He went to the Galapagos Islands, and if you look at this map down here, very, very long journey, way before the existence of the Panama Canal, so he had to go all the way around South America. But he wanted to observe everything he saw. And we usually talk about finches because that's what a lot of his research was focused on, but he also looked at tortoise shells and iguana claws. Let's get into the finches then. So he observed many different varieties of finch beaks, and he concluded that the beak shape correlates to what the finches eat. So let's kind of take a look at this. Based on these images you see here, what kind of beaks do you think an insect eater would have? Well, you could make a case for different sizes based on the sizes of insects, but typically your pointier beaks are going to be very sharp at getting insects. Seed-eating finches could also have sharp, smaller beaks. Zane. Sorry. Could also have sharp, smaller beaks as well. And then you see birds like this here have a very large beak, and they're going to crack open large seeds, things like that. So other things, like I said, he also looked at iguanas. So there were two types of iguanas in the Galapagos. There's island iguanas and mainland iguanas. So island iguanas have very large claws because they live on the rocks and the rocky shores. So they need these claws to prevent themselves from slipping. The mainland iguanas, on the other hand, had very small claws because they're climbing trees where they're eating the leaves. So if they have these like big clunky claws, they're not going to be very good, right? Imagine someone, I don't know, climbing a tree that has these super long fake nails versus someone that has normal nails. They'll probably do a little bit better. All right, so let's get into Darwin's conclusions. So he, of course, reasoned that the environments are different for different finches because they eat different things. And he also said that species gradually change over time. Remember, Lamarck thought an individual changed over time and passed this on. Darwin, on the other hand, says a species. So over many, many, many generations, the species is changing to better suit their environment, which is the whole basis behind the concept of evolution. That also brings us to the term adaptation. So an adaptation is a trait that simply helps an organism survive and reproduce, increasing overall fitness. We'll come back to what fitness means. So let's look at his theory of evolution then. This is simply stated that species change over time. Many, many other scientists have also concluded that this is true, based on many observations, researches, sources of evidence, everything. And Darwin also, you should know, published a book called The Origin of Species, which explains these findings overall. All right, let's get into some more of the terminology then. So a species, what is a species? So this is an organism that can do two things. Super important that you remember these two things. So one, reproduce in a natural setting. Let's make a note here. The zoo is not a natural setting. A farm, not a natural setting. And then second, they can reproduce to create fertile offspring. Fertile, meaning that their offspring can have offspring of their own. So our two biggest ones here are liger and mules. So ligers, are they a species? No. Mules? No. So ligers, lions and tigers, first of all, they don't even live in the same environment, so that's a problem. And second of all, ligers are sterile. You can't cross two ligers to get baby ligers. Same thing with a mule. So a mule is a horse and a donkey, and combined, they produce offspring, true, but mules are also sterile. They cannot reproduce to make more mules. Now let's talk about dogs. Are dogs considered a species? The answer to this is yes. So theoretically, these two could mate. They would need a little assistance, and childbirth would be pretty painful for the mother if that was the small dog. But dogs are different breeds, not different species. And then that brings us back to our term population. So remember, back to the ecology unit, a population is a group of members of the same species. All right, we're going to talk about that survival of the fittest term everyone likes to throw around, and we'll also revisit fitness. So what does it mean? All right, let's look at this beaver here. He has a chainsaw for a hand. Pretty cool, huh? Would he survive and probably be able to cut down a lot of trees and build a bigger and better den? I'm sure. But that is not what natural selection is. The environment does not give organisms what they need. It does, on the other hand, ensure better survival for the individuals that have the best adaptations. So natural selection is the environment selects. Super important quotes there, right? This isn't Mother Nature being like, ooh, you're gonna live, you're gonna die, you're gonna have 10 babies, you only get 2. That is not what we're talking about. This is simply if you're in an environment, let's say the Arctic, for example, and you are an Arctic fox. If you are born with white fur, you are going to blend into your environment much better than a fox born with red fur or brown fur or black fur. So the white-furred foxes are going to produce more offspring, live a longer life than the other foxes that have different fur colors. It's also important to note that fittest does not mean strongest. I'm sure you hear fitness, you think, oh yeah, I'm gonna go to the gym, I'm gonna get fit. That is not the same as fitness in the environment or in the natural world. So the fittest just means you're the best adapted, or you can produce the most offspring to carry on your genes. There's also variances, of course, in a population based on natural selection or other types of selection, which we're going to talk about. So there's 3 of them, and we'll look at graphs as well. But first of all, let's talk about their definitions. So stabilizing selection, this is where natural selection favors the average or the middle phenotype. So stable, that's a stable phenotype. Disruptive selection is what's favoring the extreme phenotypes. So super dominant, super recessive, not really those heterozygous individuals. And then directional selection is when a specific phenotype is favored and the population in general kind of shifts. So let's look at some graphs and see how you do. All right, what kind of selection do you think this is? Look at what we're selecting against. We're selecting against the mean. So this would be disruptive because this is your extreme here and extreme here. All right. What about this one? We see a shift going on. So this is directional. If you notice, the original is the dotted, the whole graph shifted. And then finally, we're selecting against the extreme. So we're favoring the middle, which would be stabilizing. All right, so of course you've heard about some of these in terms of how does natural selection apply to the real world. The Irish potato famine is something you may not know about, but in the mid-1800s, there was a lack of variation among potato plants. Well, guess what? This single fungus came around and wiped out the whole potato crop. And then, as you guessed it, We had a famine in Ireland because people couldn't grow potatoes, so that was their food source. They didn't have food anymore. So having variation, even amongst crops and in farming, is super important to ensure you get a good product. Pesticide resistance is something we touched on a little bit in the ecology unit. So it's when insects that a pesticide is applied to plants, when an insect survives that application and then goes on to reproduce. Well, guess what? That insect survived, so it has some sort of gene that ensures survival against maybe a low-level pesticide, and then that insect is going to pass those traits on to its offspring. Antibiotic resistance works pretty much the same way, except we're referring to bacteria. So bacteria can swap DNA and reproduce sexually when it's a stressful environment, aka when you start taking antibiotics because you have a bacterial infection. So now they are sexually reproducing, and if you're like, I feel better, it's only been 3 days, but it's cool, I know what I'm talking about, the doctor doesn't know anything, and you stop taking your antibiotic, we have a problem, because now you still have bacteria in your body, and they're sexually reproducing, and they're passing on their DNA to their offspring that ensured they survive what little bit of antibiotics you took. There's also some things that affect natural selection that organisms do in general. So a term called overproduction. This is just simply having more offspring than can possibly survive. I know they're super cute, but we all know that not every single one of those sea turtles is going to make it to full size. Same thing, all those little helicopters that come out of maple trees, yeah, they're not all going to be trees. It's just having competition to ensure the best adapted individuals are the ones that survive. There's also competition. So competition, you know what this is, right? You're arguing or you're fighting over things. So same thing, between the same species, or let's say you are fighting for a better spot in the lunch line or to get a media center pass, that would be interspecific competition. You're competing between individuals of your same species. Competition between different species, so if we look at this water hole down here, is introspecific. They are all competing for a source of water. And then lastly is simply genetic variation. There's differences between individuals within the same species just because of genetics and sexual reproduction. Variations are from meiosis, which then when the gametes combine, you get offspring with different things. And then also from mutations, which remember, mutations aren't always bad, they can also be good. So as a result, a strong species, a species that is going to survive, has many, many, many variations. So if you look here, here's just many different giraffe variations. And then of course these cute little kittens here, they all look different, right? All right, and that is it for part 1 of your evolution notes.